Is there further debate? Gentleman from 19.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To briefly debate against the memorial. I think we've heard the major argument from the good representative from Pocatello as to the sanctity of our institutions. I just want to point out the two Supreme Court cases that were referenced in this bill. I want to point out what they are in relation to, because I think that that holds some merit as to where this thing is headed. The first one is on line 16. In 1988, the Supreme Court of the United States stated that marriage is an institution in the maintenance of which, in its purity, the public is deeply interested, for it is the foundation of the family and society, without which there would neither civilization nor progress. There'd be neither civilization nor progress. This Supreme Court decision came down in relation to a man who had told his family that he was headed to California, and in the process of heading to California, he would support his family and continue to send back repayment. And then he moved to Oregon, never sent his family a dime, left his wife and his two children in complete poverty, and then he died. And then the state passed a law that dissolved the marriage after he was dead so the state could take the land from the family. This issue was about private property and the right of the woman to own land in the sanctity of a marriage. The second one is even more disturbing. In 1942, the Supreme Court of the United States stated that marriage is fundamental to the very existence and survival of the race. Oklahoma had a law on the books that caused forced sterilization of men who went to prison. This particular case was about a man who had been arrested for stealing chickens, and they were going to sterilize him. In the process, and through his due process, the entire law was overturned because the right to reproduce trumped the right of the state to sterilize human beings. From this came the rise of eugenics, which is one of the dirtiest parts of our history. We have a piece of legislation here that references the private property rights of women in relation to marriage and whether or not we can sterilize people who go to prison for committing a crime so they may never be able to advance their family or society. I understand one court, the 6th District Court, has upheld marriage. As it says here on line 26, the United States Court of Appeals for the 6th Circuit recognizes that the Constitution of the United States does not demand that a redefinition of marriage be forced upon the states. What we are left with is this: by creating a status and by subsidizing it with tax filing privileges and deductions, the state created an incentive for two people who procreate together to stay together for the purpose of rearing offsprings. And yet, in our own state, we have found that it is perfectly reasonable for a same-sex couple to adopt a child and rear that child and raise that child, where if they had not, that child may have been left in foster care for the duration of his or her life. We also like to make this somewhat off argument that a minority of people have made this decision, and yet one court, the 6th District Court, has decided against this. Meanwhile, the 4th, the 9th, the 7th, and the 10th have all ruled under equal protection in the 14th Amendment and the 5th Amendment, which did not have to do with slavery, that due process is violated in the case of same-sex marriages. Mr. Speaker, I disagree with legislation like this because I do think it puts us in the headlines. I live in a state that I'm very proud of. The day I moved here in 1993 to go to college, I fell in love with Idaho. This puts us in the web, this puts us in the news as a state that's intolerant and does not understand the important separation of powers. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a roll call vote because I think understanding that eugenics and the right to own property as a woman in a divorce is something that we should understand before we vote on a resolution such as this. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Gentleman from 16.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate against the memorial.
The gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And good ladies and gentlemen, we've heard a lot of debate already on this, and I will do my best to amend my speech on the fly. Of all the bills that I have voted on in this body in the last 10 weeks, House Joint Memorial 4 causes me the most hurt. It's one thing to have debates about taxes, eminent domain, abortion, and I can be on the winning side of an argument for one vote and the losing side on the next, and it's okay because those things aren't personal. This bill is personal, and it hurts me. On October 15th, 2014, the United States Supreme Court lifted its final stay on issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples. And on that day, the marriage license that was issued to me and to my husband from an out-of-state marriage was finally recognized here in Idaho. This was a moment that I honestly never thought I would ever see in my lifetime. And I can't describe in words what it means to me, but I know the joy that I saw in the beaming of the smiles of the faces of the gay and lesbian constituents who received their licenses that day. And that joy is very much like the joy that I am blessed to have experienced with my spouse. What pains me now is that this bill implies that my marriage isn't worth as much as someone else's. I'm treated as though my marriage is not equal. Is my marriage so despicable that a federal judge should be impeached? Ladies and gentlemen, I would never bring a joint memorial before you or any piece of legislation that would state or imply that someone else's marriage is less than mine. And that's why I'm hurt. Mr. Speaker, if my objections to this bill were entirely personal, I would declare Rule 38. But this speaks to a class of Idahoans. It speaks to a class of people who deserve, under the law, to be treated equally and without discrimination. Ladies and gentlemen, House Joint Memorial 4 ultimately does nothing. The folks in Washington aren't going to pay attention to our little memorial. DC is gridlocked anyway. This memorial is the last thing that is going to break that logjam. All that this bill really does is this. If you vote for this, you get to go home and you get to tell your constituents that you voted against gay marriage. If you vote against this, you get to go home and tell your constituents that you supported marriage equality. So in the end, all we've done is campaigned on company time, which is the people's time clock. And in doing that, what we've failed to do is to use our time to improve education, to create livable wage jobs, to fix a broken transportation system, and to support equality and non-discrimination for all Idahoans. Ladies and gentlemen, on this one, you need to vote your heart. But I ask you with as much graciousness as I can muster, please don't bring any more discriminatory legislation like this. Please. Thank you.
Thank you, good gentleman. Is there further debate? Gentleman from 23.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been hesitant, but there's been a few things stated today in debate that I think, is in error. And may I go to the first part, and that's this. The Constitution and the procreators of the Constitution and those that created the Constitution created the three different departments. The legislative is to make the laws, and inside that legislative, it's two bodies. One looks after the people, and the other originally looked after the states before the 17th Amendment. I believe it was the 17th Amendment in 1913. Now we have two bodies that look after the people. But originally, We had that. And then the executive looked after the people as a whole. And the judicial didn't look after 2% of the people, Mr. Speaker. The judicial was organized to interpret the Constitution, not to look after this minority or that minority or whatever minority you might call it. It was to interpret the Constitution according to what the Founding Fathers gave us. Now, I'm going to give you a couple examples where that's gone awry. The welfare clause, when it was originally created, and our Founding Fathers believed in it, was to have you take your time, your talents, and go out into the world and harvest and use natural resources to create your own welfare. How could the federal government, and general means everybody, give everybody something out of the pot when the pot is only created by everybody that helps with it?
Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman from 19.
I question the relevance.
Well, that would be like calling the kettle black here. I mean, but in all seriousness, you know, we've allowed this to go in places that, but I think that anyway, I'll call him out of order when I think he's out of order, and I appreciate you standing up. Go ahead, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, enough said in that particular area. Now, when it comes to the bill itself, there's an area in there, right in the whereas, where it states this, that the Sixth Court of Appeals stated this. What are we left with is this: by creating a status of marriage and et cetera, and then it goes on, the states created an incentive for two people who procreate. I beg your pardon?
We do not need a biological lesson here.
I understand that,
Okay.
but you understand what it says. Okay, then the next part is this, and I have a dictionary right here. My wife bought it for me, 1828, Noah Webster. Now let's go to the Constitution itself, Article 6, excuse me. And in Article 6, it states this: the Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance. What people don't understand is the meaning of that word pursuance right here. And I can tell you what it means and what it meant in that day. It meant pursue, to proceed along or follow or continue with a specified course. In other words, things that were going to happen further inside of the Constitution or be amended or et cetera, the court was to determine that that was following the course originally set by the Constitution. And some things that they do doesn't do that. And, Mr. Speaker, that's why I was trying to explain the General Welfare Clause in 1936, if I may proceed there. Previous to that time, the court had ruled that we should make decisions based on what the language meant at the time, and et cetera, and I could give you quite a few here, but I won't do that. But in 1936, in the case of Butler, they changed the meaning of general welfare to private welfare when they said this, and interpreted the Constitution to say this, that it's okay to take from the haves and give to the have-nots. That opened the door. That was not legislation, that was interpretation. But that interpretation opened the door for the socialist mess we find ourselves in today, Mr. Speaker.
Back on subject, sir.
Thank you. So basically what I'm trying to say to you is this: there is a very definite need for our Supreme Court justices to stick to their job of interpretation. And as Thomas Jefferson warned, they will in time start to erode and gain a little here and gain a little there, and then they'll be making law. And their job is to interpret the Constitution, and if they depart from that, then they should be held accountable. And that's my debate, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, good gentleman. Is there further debate? Hearing none. Will the gentleman from District 7 please stand and close the debate?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll try to quickly cover a couple of things. The gentleman from 6 talked about the Supreme Court's oath of office and all the things they do. And toward the end of that, it kind of finished off by saying, as long as they're in accord with the Constitution. So that's all I'm saying. I don't disagree with that. And then there was the comment about rights and justice, and that is one of their responsibilities, not only to hold the Constitution so it doesn't evolve and so it'll be there from now on, but it's also, if there's injustice, as the Constitution and all the laws pursuant to the Constitution cause injustice, then they're to rule on that. But my position there is that you can't say an immoral behavior, according to God's Word, that we've all been taught since the beginning, is something that's just. And that's really kind of what this is all about. We all in our own mind, and we're all good people, and we all believe our religious beliefs. But what is really injustice and what is really a law of the land that's been the law since the beginning of time, that's very important to society to keep that law. And one other thing was brought up about amendments. Amendments won't get any judges impeached because amendments can only come by the people and by a 3/4 vote of the people. And our forefathers were very smart and knew that maybe there was something wrong and might need fixed. And so if we want to fix it, fine, let's fix it. That won't cause a problem for the judges because it's not their jurisdiction. Change can only happen through a constitutional amendment, and that's not through a judge. If any change happens, they're definitely in the wrong and need impeached. And that's a message that needs to get out there. And I think it's important we send that message. And I think it's important that we are one nation under God, and we better uphold Christian morals. As an example, how about fornication, adultery, and other issues? And so, Mr. Speaker, with that, I'll close my remarks, but I think it's very important that we are doing our job when we uphold the traditional laws and the Constitution.
The debate is closed. The question before us, and there has been a request for a roll call vote, is shall House Joint Memorial Number 4 pass? The clerk will unlock the machine. The members will cast their votes. Has every member voted?
Beeler?
Does any member wish to change his vote? Clerk will lock the machine, record the vote, and read the pairs.
Mr. Speaker, we have pairs at the desk. Chu votes nay, and Palmer votes aye.
The roll call shows 44 aye, 25 nay, 1 absent and excused. House Joint Memorial Number 4 has passed the House and will be transmitted to the Senate. Gentleman from 14.